All right, so let's kind of go back over some of this real quick. What makes an interest group successful? Well, if just because you're a large group doesn't mean you're going to be successful. All right, you have potential groups and you have actual groups. The potential groups, these are people that say that I believe in the same thing that you believe in. However, they don't join. They don't get involved. They're not a part of the. They're not a part of what's going on. The actual group are the people that actually join. Hang on a minute. After I put my eyeball in it earlier, it's not working right. All right. Okay. So the actual group are potential group members who actually join the group. And most interest groups, again, work for the collective good. These large interest groups, so sometimes they don't. There's something of value that can't be held from a potential group member. For instance, when I think we went to the board for a pay raise, the or SCEA went and lobbied for that. We did as a group, but not everybody went, and not everybody in the school system. There's several groups. There's several interest groups that are floating around here, like teacher unions. So, but they didn't go. They didn't. These other groups didn't go, but SCEA did, but everybody got the benefit of what that group is, and that's called a free rider problem. And we were working for the potential good of everybody. The problem is that everybody gets something of value even if they don't work for it. They don't have to join. Okay, and the only way that they can get the full benefit of the group, though, is to join, and they can get a lot of different like benefits, such as like free law, like an attorney, or you can get discounts and that kind of thing. But people don't really care unless it's something that comes up that they have an interest in. People ask why they joined the retired members group for information. So apparently, I get information from them all the time, and I'm not in the retired members group, and I'm not 55. So yeah, I don't know why, but I do. And they also have free insurance. Now, I do know people that have taken that, or not free insurance, but cheaper insurance. And there's other benefits that go along with them, the social reasons, travel discounts, like KEA offers those as well. So but that's not a real reason, I think, that people want to join. All right, but they do get the benefits if something of value, if something happens. Now, what does happen, and what you've kind of seen with these groups before, is that these large groups can mobilize very quickly if needed. Okay, if there is an issue that they feel really strongly about. For instance, ask any teacher and they will tell you their opinion, more than likely, or will share an opinion about teacher retirement. And there's already like several pre-filed bills for this term. So I'm like, dude, come on. We got other things to do besides worrying about retirement. But anyway, I digress. Anyway, it says politicians are more likely to listen to a group that shows it cares deeply about an issue. One thing I will say is that they were trying a couple years ago when teachers did protest. They did try to listen, I think, to both sides. Did we get what we wanted? No. But for right now, we have gotten a lot of things. And they did, I think, try to listen to both sides of the coin, where the executive branch was one way. The people that were running the legislature had a group that were, that were actually listening to everybody else. So we'll see. But that's just an example. That's just an easy example of how they can mobilize and what makes them successful. They need intensity, and a lot of times a narrow interest that they don't compromise on is a lot easier for a politician to get behind. All right. However, there's other things that make them successful as well. All right. Money talks. And you've heard that before, but it's very much so but not always. But money does talk. And there is this perception, I think, of politics that the more money you have, the more power you have. Well, not necessarily, because there's been some court cases and there's been some things that happened that doesn't necessarily go along with that. But when you do make a donation, for instance, when a group makes a monetary donation to a politician, it does translate usually, depending, I guess, on the amount or whatever, it does translate into access to that politician. You might get a phone call, you might get a meeting, or you might get support for a policy that you are looking at, but it depends on that policy and it depends on if they can. All right, if they can get behind it. Now, wealthier groups, all right, so it's anyway, wealthier groups have more resources to access, but they don't always win. In your book, it talked about the Tax Reform Act of 1996, and that's going to be an example that you might want to look at. It's on page 314, and it just talks about how one politician, he was being courted by these interest groups, and he ended up not getting what he wanted. All right, so you might want to look at that again. All right, how groups try to shape public policy. Just know that also interest groups, it's a very highly competitive groups of, or enterprise, I should say. So it's run a lot like a business, and people think of them as a business almost, okay? Sometimes, depending on the donations and depending on what's going on, and it sounds like I'm being really cynical, but it's just how it works, okay? There seems to be somewhat of a correlation between money and lobbying, why lobbying success is so weak. First, they find that lobbying is very competitive. Once one side mobilizes, the other side's going to have to mobilize. And the second thing is, it's usually the top groups that are mobilizing against each other. And if one doesn't have money, they better have size. That's something too. You don't necessarily have to pay them, but you better have size and a force that they will listen to and be reckoned with. Okay. And usually it's the top groups that have those resources. So they are the ones that are usually fighting against each other. And these little small groups don't have as much resources to be able to do that. So it looks like it looks like it's just for the wealthy, but it's not, right? And sometimes they get lucky and will listen to the other side with these smaller groups. Okay. All right. Lobbying is a communication to a governmental decision maker with the hope of influencing his or her decision. Okay. Basically, lobbyists are political persuaders who represent organized groups. All right. They tell them what they want. All right. So they're a source of information. They help to get legislation passed. They can help formulate a strategy for the politician. They're also it may even it's kind of like a sounding board. This is what they're supposed to do. They're kind of a sounding off board to see where the candidates stand on political issues. A lot of times these lobbyists are actually former politicians themselves, so they know the insides and outsides of what's going on, how to work the system. Okay. So there's two different types of lobbyists. The first type is a regular paid employee. Okay. And then they may hold a title. They may, do whatever. So their office may be in another state, but they know why they're in Washington. People know who they are. They know what they are wanting. Sometimes they avoid them. Sometimes they don't. Okay. The second type is available for hire on a temporary basis. I'm going to show my age here, but there is a movie called The American President.
Daniel Dunaway, please come to the front office. Daniel Dunaway to the front office, please.
This lobbyist generally is hired by these smaller groups. So this is how a smaller lobbying group or interest group can get in the door, is they hire someone that is a good lobbyist, pay them that money to represent what they're working for. But they need a temporary person, I guess, to run and talk about whatever their interest might be. If you watch The American President, it's Michael Douglas is the president, and I can't remember who his actual, Ann Benning, I think, is the girl, but she is working for the environmental protection, and she's a big, heavy-handed lobbyist, but she's hired by a small firm to go and lobby with the president. So that's an example. It's just, I'm showing my age, and I thought I'd give you a real world example. Like I said, their main goal is to influence legislation and to influence that politician to fight for their legislation, but they can be of some use. They can help them form decisions, strategies. They are a source of information if they need something about the environment, or if they need something about pro-choice lobbies or whatever, or pro-life lobbies or education or whatever. They can serve as a source of information. Okay, so there's the big spenders on lobbying. The ones this is up to 2007. I don't think that this is changing much even now in 2020, but pharmaceuticals, I'm sure, have a big, huge lobby, and I would bet you $100 they're still paying a lot of money for those. See, insurance, I don't see them as being as big of well, yeah, I do, because if you talk about ACA, or if you talk about Trump's plan, you're going to have lobbyists for either one. So yeah, I would think insurance. Oil and gas probably is up a little bit further. I think education's probably really good where it is. Why do you think computers and internet would be up that high? So that's kind of an interesting thing. But if you look here, pharmaceutical companies are the ones that are pushing. Okay, so keep in mind that data are presented in terms of millions spent. So pharmaceutical companies spend millions or billions of dollars on lobbies inside Congress. All right, insurance, pretty close. I would think it's even more now. All right, and like I said before, if you want to know about your candidate, go and see what interest groups support them and how much money they get from those groups. The first time I did that, it was kind of an eye-opening experience, because like one of the big donors, for instance, for Mitch McConnell is Humana. All right, so that's an insurance company, or it was. I'm not sure if it is now. That was 3 years ago. I'd have to research that one again, but the insurance. All right, the National Rifle Association is also a big lobby. I don't know. I think it comes and goes in spurts. I mean, I know people that are actually part of this group. I mean, anyway. it says they've lobbied successfully. They pay millions of dollars or almost upwards of billions of dollars to lobby against gun control laws. Charlton Heston was probably the one that's most associated with, and they still use him as their spokesperson. There's other people that are spokespeople, but this one is a big lobby. And most of the time, groups will stay with people that they know support. They won't try to go and convince someone else. All right. Like your book talked about the example that, pro-life groups would love to go and talk to Dianne Feinstein of California, who is a pro-choice state, a pro-choice person. She's a woman, but they're not going to mess with her because it's just going to be a waste of time. All right. So they usually stick with people because she's going to have the pro-choice faction behind her, and they're going to convince her to do other things. So she's going to be listening to the people too that give her an edge up, money-wise, more than likely, as opposed to someone that doesn't, unless they want to triple whatever they're paying. I don't know. I'm just making that up. But anyway. All right. Electioneering. Electioneering is talking about aiding candidates financially and getting group members out to support them. So they do have an interest in politics, as in like keeping people in office that support their ideas. All right. So electioneering is direct group involvement in the electoral process by helping to fund campaigns, getting members to work for candidates, and forming political action committees or forming PACs. So they are good people to get out and like get people to vote for, go door to door or speak on behalf or whatever. And they can pressure people, I think, too. PACs are political funding vehicles created by the 74 campaign finance reforms, which you should know. The number of PACs have exploded in recent years. And this is from your book. So if you look on page 317, the number of PACs went from 608 in 1974, the year they were created by campaign finance reforms, to a little over 4,600 in 2009. And I'm thinking it's probably more than that. I'm probably saying at least 6,000 of them by now, at least. All right. There's no major interest group seeking to exert influence on the political process, but they can't pass up the opportunity to funnel money honestly and openly into the campaign of its supporters. For instance, this is an example of how that works, being an election, talking about electioneering. The Major League Baseball PAC gave over $201,000 to congressional candidates during the 2008 election cycle. So think back like to Trump's campaign, what groups gave money, or even looking at McConnell's campaign. All right, he had the FOP, he had I don't know, what other groups? So think about that. I want to think he had like Ford's group. He had all kinds of groups that came out. Okay. All right, so you need to look at how much they are giving in electioneering, because that does make a difference. I think it makes a difference, and a lot of times has been proven it does make a difference on how they vote, because they're getting financed by these people. And a lot of critics say that PACs should be eliminated again. So I don't know. All right. All right. So look at those. Look at the where it talks about electioneering and how the PACs can influence that. That will probably be part of a question that you have to answer on the AP exam. They always ask a lot of questions about PACs. Okay. There's only been a handful of people that resisted that money from coming from the PACs. All right, so litigation, talking about going to court. Another way they try to shape policy is through the courts. So if they fail to do legislation, if Congress fails to take up something, they will go through the courts. All right. Now, all right, so there's some examples in your book talking about and I couldn't think of any. I don't know if the election one would be one that they might use on because it's not really a political action group. It's a group of Senate or House members that are doing this. But there's got to be groups that are following them and pushing this. So I haven't done that research yet, but I will let you know. But there is a group of House members, 106 of them, that have signed on to a lawsuit about the election. And I don't know, they've filed, some of them have filed amicus curiae briefs, and these are just like the friends of the court, and they're giving their argument as to why they should or shouldn't do something. There's been some famous court cases, or there has been some other court cases that your book's mentioning. Numerous groups filed amicus briefs in highly publicized. Usually, they're highly publicized. They're very emotional cases. So there's one that was filed in the state of Kentucky at the Supreme Court level, dealing with how the governor is handling the pandemic. So that was one. The case for the Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, which is an affirmative action case. Which alleged that affirmative action programs was a form of reverse discrimination. Okay, and it came about that the Supreme Court had been open to a lot of different groups rather than deciding on the merits, and so that kind of gets them in some hot water. That is a case that you have to know about, but we're not going to talk about that. That's just a group. That was just a case that your book had given. There has been some civil rights cases. There were several, what do you call them? Environmental groups. That seems to be the famous ones. But anyway, you get my point. They write arguments and they submit it to the court in support of one side of the case or another. Sometimes they influence. Sometimes it's just like, okay, yes, thanks for your opinion. But sometimes they do have some kind of effect on the outcomes. Class action lawsuits enable a group of people in a similar situation to combine their common grievances into a single suit. I don't know if they have a recall, like Ford had some issues with the Ford Explorer. That was organized into a class action lawsuit, and some people got money based on a tier of like if they had problems and if they just owned one. So it just didn't matter. And sometimes it's good for everybody, and sometimes they just want to have it's like safety in numbers kind of thing. All right, but this is a more direct judicial strategy. If you file a class action lawsuit, it's considered a direct attack. Okay. For instance, in 1977, the flight attendants won a class action suit against the airline industry's regulation that all stewardesses be unmarried. All right. Yeah. I'm sure that RBG had a field day. Anyway, or she would have. All right. So class action lawsuits, you've got briefs. This is just kind of an indirect way of getting your opinion out. Class action lawsuits are more direct. And these are on page 320. All right, so one thing that they can do to shape public policy is to go public. All right, so some people are just kind of working behind the scenes, but once they decide to go public, they're always interested in what the public wants. They do a very thorough job of making sure that their image is good, that they don't have any skeletons in their closet, so to speak. All right, so they try to cultivate a good public image, and they build a reservoir of goodwill with the public. So they try to do some fundraising. They try to give back to the communities in which they're trying to serve. So they want to look good, so that, because a lot of times interest groups have some bad reps. For instance, like Brown-Forman. Is it Brown-Forman? Or Philip Morris? Philip Morris, maybe, in Louisville. I think it's Philip Morris. Anyway, that's a lobby group. All right. That's also a big corporation. It's big, corporations have more money. It's easier for them to mobilize. And they're trying to make an image for themselves that they are do-gooders, so to speak, that they are trying to help others out. So they use marketing strategies to influence public opinion, try to sell their image, try to create a positive atmosphere around themselves. They advertise to motivate. They try to inform people of what they're doing exactly. So they're trying to be out in the open. So that's one way that they can look to influence or shape public policy. All right, so they give you a lot of times they do things like try to appeal to young people, like YouTube, social media, whatever. So that's what they're doing lately. So they're trying to make sure that people like them, I guess. All right. I thought this is kind of funny. It says paid for by the coalition to scare your pants off. Interest groups spent over $100 million appealing to public opinion during the debate over healthcare in 1994. All right. So this was Hillary Clinton's baby to socialize medicine. All right. Obviously, she was working on it. Bill Clinton tried to get it passed. W did not. And they kind of took back some of those things that they were looking to do. And then Obamacare came back, the ACA came back and grappled with it again and passed it this time. And now they're in the process of changing it again. All right, so interest groups spent over $100 million appealing to public opinion during the debate over health care. In a counter ad produced by the Democratic National Committee, the argument was made that opponents of the Clinton health care plan were using scare tactics. And you can see the tag end of the ad in this photo, and this is what it is. All right. So types of interest groups, just know that these are ways to shape them. And then there's different types. So the first one are economic interest groups. All right, so they use those tactics like litigation, electioneering, lobbying. All right, but there's economic interest groups, and these are labor unions, Ford being a big one. That's the big one or the AFL-CIO. Those are pretty large unions. So they're usually pressing for better working conditions and higher wages.
Marvin Truax, please come to the front office. Marvin Truax, please come to the front office.
But a lot of times, again, people don't want to join a group, but they want the benefits of being in that group. Like higher, most of the time these labor unions want better working conditions, more pay, better benefits, time off, and that kind of thing. They also support now political candidates. All right, so they can give money to that. So they try to keep within what their base wants. All right, so if you look at economic interest groups like the labor unions and things like that, there's a thing called a union shop, which means they're forcing people to join. I know Ford, I think, makes sure that, you're automatically enrolled in their labor union until a few years ago when Matt Bevin's administration here in Kentucky, anyway, passed the right to work laws, which say that you don't have to join, but they can't outlaw you the benefits if it's something big like a pay raise. All right. I think that's it. All right. So in 1947, the biggest blow came to the American labor movement and occurred under the Taft-Hartley Act, permitting states to adopt the right to work laws. But Kentucky didn't get them until fairly recently, right? So you were automatically enrolled in a union. So go and look at the history behind the American labor movement. It said it reached its peak in 1956. So most people were joining unions up until 1956. It says 33% of the non-agricultural workforce belonged to a union. It's kind of dropped to about 12%. But I always tell people, the more people you have, it's safety in numbers, and the more you can do because the more financing you have. All right, so that's the one thing behind those labor unions. So the business labor unions says they're united when it comes to promoting great profits, but are fragmented in policy. And if there was an American power elite, it certainly must be dominated by leaders of the biggest banks, the insurance companies, and multinational corporations. So these business interest groups seem or tend to dominate the lobbying efforts or working in Washington because they have the finances to do that. The Chamber of Commerce has become an imposing lobbying force, and at $100 million a year. Okay. Business PACs have increased more dramatically over the past several decades, considering now that they can actually donate to campaigns, which, in the beginning when we started talking about the Finance Acts, like under Roosevelt and stuff, where they could not donate to any campaign official. All right, you have environmental interests, I think is the next. For unions, a few issues are important as job security for their members. Labor membership has a percentage of state workers. So if you look at Kentucky, 8 to 12% of the labor, and this is 2011. So I'm sure it's roughly about the same thing, maybe a little bit higher. It might fall into the 13-14% interest or group membership. Okay, but we're still a right to work state. Environmental interests, these are another type of group. You guys know about these, but promote policies to control pollution, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, protecting lands in Alaska, the National Wildlife Refuge, strip mining, or they're against strip mining, supersonic aircraft. These are all environmental lobbies. Now, they come and go, I think. I think under the Obama administration, you saw an increase in environmental lobbies. I think you're going to see another one under Biden because Biden had not all, but some of the same interests as Obama did. You saw it decrease a little bit under Trump, and then you've seen the business lobbies increase as opposed to the environmental ones, I think. So they kind of come and go. All right, but they have become a very powerful lobby. If you look here, it says they prevented building power plants for the past 30 years, nuclear power plants. All right, so they do have some power and they do have some clout. All right, so 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection. Okay, and okay, a lot of times this is easier said than done. So you're going to have some equality interest groups. All right, so you have two sets of interest groups representing minorities and women, and have made equal rights their main policy. So what are their goals? That's probably just something you need to remember is they press for equality, obviously, at the polls. So disenfranchising thousands or hundreds of thousands of voters is going to become a problem, especially if it's being heard in the Supreme Court soon. Inequalities in housing, the job, education, and all other facets. So some of the more, all right, so just some of the more famous court cases that has been heard, and some of the ways that they have shaped that policy, the equality interest, and trying to maintain the 14th Amendment, equal protection. You've got the Brown versus Board. The oldest and largest of the equality groups, I guess, equality interest groups would be like the NAACP. Brown versus Board, what did that do? You should know. It overturns Plessy versus Ferguson. Just know that. And Brown versus Board is the one that desegregated public education. Okay. Now you also have the National Organization for Women, or NOW, that actually helps women. Okay. So obviously in the workplace, and other things. They've kind of shifted because they did get the right to vote. So that was kind of their main, making sure that women weren't disenfranchised anymore. So they've switched their, I guess, lobbying efforts to include like equal pay for equal work, like combating the wage gap, and there is one, and any other discrimination against women. I guess their heyday though would probably have been the 70s, some in the 80s, but like the 70s, that was probably when they were the biggest. They were also, and I don't know, I've heard rumblings, they were behind the ERA, or the ERA amendment, Equal Rights Amendment. That would have been the 27th Amendment. Okay. But it did not get passed. I remember seeing all kinds of billboards and people, I mean, they were a big interest here in Kentucky. Now was, and they were pushing Equal Rights Amendment, which states that equality of rights under the law shall not be abridged on account of sex. But it went through Congress, but it couldn't get through the states. All right, so I've heard rumblings that they may try again. So I don't know. Stay tuned. All right, other types, consumer and other public interest lobbies. You can look at these on page 326. General Motors has some, I don't know. Oh, the Children's Defense Fund, duh. Public interest lobbies, groups that seek a collective good and the achievement of which will not selectively and materially benefit the membership. So yeah, public, like the Children's Defense Fund, this is to combat like child abuse. You can use this fund to help with court costs or any kind of other costs that associated with kids and fighting their abusers or that kind of thing. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, that's another group that helps fight for consumers. Like, so they would recall products. So that's where you would get like your recall on your cars or your, this was talking about Starbucks, where water bottles reported to shatter in consumers' hands. Like Ford had a big problem with their SUVs rolling over. So that was part of that. So those are consumer and other interest lobby groups. All right, so as a response to these groups, so how did they influence? That's where you get your consumer advocacy. The Consumer Product Safety Commission was created through these consumer groups in 1973. All right. So if you look through history, interest groups and democracy, how do they go together? James Madison wanted a wide open system. All right. He wanted the groups to compete. If you don't like your interests, if your interests weren't getting looked at, then you should be able to go and compete somewhere else. Okay, that's what he thought. So he was looking more at pluralism, more than likely. So how do the pluralists look in interest groups? Public interest prevails from this competition. That's kind of what James Madison was looking at, I think, that they thrive on that competition and eventually the voices will be heard. All right, elite theorists said the proliferation of business pacts is evidence of interest group corruption, that the money is talking. And if you have too many groups, it does the opposite of what James Madison wanted, and influence of groups lead to policy gridlock. All right, so it says James Madison defined his way of thinking as a free society must allow for the representation of all groups that seek to influence political decision making, yet groups are usually more concerned with their own self-interest than with the needs of society as a whole. And for democracy to work well, it is important that they not be allowed to assume a dominant position. So he was more of the pluralistic theory thinking, that he thinks that eventually the voices will be heard with, through these competing groups, the outcome will be that the voices will be heard. All right. All right. So if you look here, elite theories, they disagree with the conclusion and point to the proliferation of business pacts as evidence of more interest group corruption. So they're looking at the big corporations that are being allowed to influence government, and it's taking away the democratic process. Okay. That is a criticism of that, of the interest group process. The elite theories disagree with pluralism. Okay. All right, and the hyper-pluralists maintain that whenever a major interest group objects strongly to proposed legislation, policymakers will bend over backward to try to accommodate them. And if you look, yeah, they do, especially if they're getting money from them, and you've got one group pulling you one way and one group pulling you the other way, and you want to satisfy both groups, so you have contradicting laws, people are constantly at each other, and there is no policy being created. I think the example right now would you've got interest groups probably lobbying behind the scenes of this, the COVID relief bills. You've probably got several interest groups lobbying behind the scenes, and they're going to do what they want. They're going to do what they say. All right. So that's why you've got so many competing interests. And guess what we have? Policy gridlock. Nobody is willing to compromise, and nobody can agree. So interest groups in the scope of government, they seek to maintain policies and programs that benefit them. They pressure government to do more things, so that's probably a good thing for them. They pressure them to do something. As the government does more groups form to get more, creating policy gridlock. Okay? Because you're going to always have a group that represents another group that is not happy with what the other group did. Hope you got that. Anyway, so pluralists, elites think that, okay, pluralists think that it's good to have competition and that eventually voices will prevail. Elite theorists said that no, we need just a select group because the more you have and the more these businesses start influencing government, the more corruption you're going to have. And then the more groups you have, you're going to have policy gridlock. All right. Remember, they don't run candidates. All right. But they do influence candidates a lot. All right. The role of interest groups consists of groups that participate in the political process in order to promote the policy goals which members share. They usually focus their efforts on one specific issue area, unlike political parties, which have to address all areas of public. So the interest groups are specialists, political parties are generalists. All right. I hope this didn't confuse you very much, but Chapter 11, interest groups, it's kind of interesting to see what interest groups are behind what politicians. All right. So have a good day. And I might be able to turn this off and I might not.